Hello and welcome to Wholehearted News. I'm Raji. They're calling it the largest protest in world history. The Punjabi Kisan Protests have not only made international waves with solidarity protests, but they also are touching the hearts of millions around the world.
We need the farmers, not only in India, all over the whole world.
While the protests started in the Indian states of Punjab and Haryana, hundreds of thousands of farmers from all over India are protesting new agricultural laws that came in September. The new laws aim to deregulate the farming industry and bring it into the free market by allowing farmers to set their own prices and sell their crops to private businesses. Until now, Indian farmers have sold their crops directly to the government at guaranteed prices. Now, that's still just at the surface level. Here to help me understand and go a little bit more deeper into the issues facing the farmers and the government is Yudhvir Jaswal. Yudhvir is the lead journalist of South Asian Daily. He is the CEO and group editor of Y Media. Y Media is one of the largest South Asian networks in North America. Yudhvir has been following this story from the very beginning and is here to share his knowledge and insights into the matter at hand. He's joining me from his studio in Mississauga, Canada. Yudhvir, it's such a pleasure to be speaking with you today. How are you?
I'm doing great, Raji. I hope you're doing great too, and thanks for having me. Welcome.
Thank you. So let's jump right in. Now, can you give us a little bit of a timeline of how we got to the current events and the current state of the protests in India?
Yeah. You know what, a brief background would be like this, that yes, in India, you could say that approximately 55 to 60% of the population is working in the farming sector right now. And when we're talking about 50 to 60%, the population there is approximately 1.4 billion people. And the GDP contribution for the agriculture sector is merely 15 to 16%. And farming was not a very profitable business if you look right across India. Now, what happened after the independence, yes, there were diversified crops, but then during the 60s, India, there was a food shortage and we had a deficit at that time as far as especially the food grains is concerned. That's the time that the India's government requested the farmers that they are going to support them, and if they could grow certain crops, especially paddy, that's rice, and wheat. The farmers did that, especially Punjab, Haryana, and some parts in Uttar Pradesh, and few other farmers as well, but mostly from Punjab and Haryana.
Sorry, just so I'm understanding correctly, the farmers asked the government originally back in the 1960s for help with their crops.
No, actually, it was the other way around. The government asked the farmers. The government needed help because at that time, there was a deficit as far as the food grains are concerned. We didn't have that much rice in India. We didn't have that much wheat in India. And India wasn't economically that strong as well. And India basically didn't have that much money as well. They had to import all these food grains. So the government requested the farmers and how they would support them, that yes, the central government in India, which usually we call here in states or Canada as the federal government, the central government would support the farmers through the provincial government, that's called as the state government, with a minimum support price, which is called as MSP. As we move further, we'll be discussing about MSP as well. So through this MSP support, the farmers were assured of procurement, that yes, their produce will be procured by the government, and the farmers were also assured of a minimum support price as well. So that is one thing which has become a sticky point now. As we move further, we'll discuss that. So things were fine, and we called it the Green Revolution from 60s, 70s up until 80s. And amazing job done by the farmers, amazing job done by everyone involved. And India became surplus. So now the government started discussing now that we have surplus food grains, why don't we diversify the crops? And but now to transition from mostly two crops. I mean, in Punjab, if you see that, you know, before in 1950s or even 40s, paddy and wheat, both included, you had only around 35 to 40% of the total area used for agriculture was used for these crops. Eventually in 60s or even in 70s, it rose to around 50%. But now in Punjab, around 86% of the total agriculture area, 86% is used for just wheat and paddy. So yes, the subsequent governments, whether it was the Congress government, whether it's the BJP government, the Vajpayee government, or now then against the Congress government, which was there for 10 years, and now again you have the BJP government. The subsequent governments did try to bring in some reforms, but it's always difficult to bring in those reforms, and did want that yes, the farmers should be diversifying as far as the crop produce is concerned, but that wasn't possible. So now here we are, the government has brought in reforms, which the government claims, because I'll be presenting you both sides of the stories. Now the government claims that they are bringing in reforms because as far as the farming sector is concerned, it's not a very profitable sector, and there are various reasons to that. Because when the farmers produce, yes, a lot of that ends up in the storage with the government, and instead of getting exported or having more diversified crop, and all this needs a lot of investment. Maybe the farmers won't be able to invest that much. Are the commission agents, which they call them as artiyas, are they going to invest? The answer is no. The state government hasn't that much money. The central government is not really interested in investing that money. So that's why they're bringing in private sector, which the government claims that yes, they would invest the money, and yes, eventually the income of the farmers would grow. They will have more options to sell it, not only through the mandis, but also to the private sector players. Now the farmers say no. They say no, we disagree with the government reforms. The farmers are concerned about quite a few things now, but mainly to list in the interest of time, maybe 3 or 4 things which they are concerned. The farmers say that, you know what, we've been assured of a minimum support price. So with the private players entering the market, there'll be a competition between the private players and the APMC mandis. APMCs basically operate these mandis. So they say, so what will happen eventually, that yes, the government will start to eventually bring these MSPs down, and they will eventually stop giving any MSP, and the private players will be the only players left. Farmers are also saying that yes, here we are assured of procurement, because almost 85% of the paddy and approximately 70% of the wheat which is produced in Punjab or Haryana, that is being procured right now. So it's not only the issue of MSP, they get a guaranteed MSP, minimum support price, and also their produce is being procured right now. So they say MSP would go with the private players, because private players might try to negotiate more and more as far as MSP is concerned. And the procurement also, they won't be assured of the procurement. To end up, I can say the farmers' demand is that all 3 laws that the government is bringing in, they will be making them more vulnerable with the corporates, whereas the government is continuously claiming that no, that's not the case. These are reforms, and much needed reforms. That's what the government is claiming. Please.
Thank you so much for that very informative and thorough recap. Now, I want to just circle back to the 1960s when India became industrialized and the fertilizers and all that stuff came in. And that's when we saw a lot of the farms and the crops kind of going down. Do you think that had a giant repercussion for where we are today? And do you think that the farmers are a little afraid of what is going to come in the future because they don't really have a guarantee? I know the government is saying, don't worry, but I mean, this is their livelihood too. A lot of the farmers said that they feel that their livelihood is threatened. And I mean, that's a big deal.
Yeah, it is a big deal, and I think we have to understand the concern of the farmers, and it has got much to do with the current farm bills, and the 1960s of era is not there anymore. India is today surplus as far as these food grains are concerned. Obviously, we can talk about the nutritional aspect, but that's a different talk altogether. But if we talk about today, the farmers are concerned. Why? Because as I already explained, that you know what, if your 80-85% of the produce that you're doing for paddy is being procured by the government, it's being procured at a MSP, minimum support price, and then you have 70% of the wheat which is being procured by the government, again at a minimum support price, and the total farmland Punjab and Haryana, we can discuss the reasons why they weren't able to diversify. We can talk about that as well. But the total farmland around, again, 80-85% is being used for these two basically crops right now. So, it was sort of okay. Not everything was going well because that's another thing that yes, there are still farmers committing suicide. They have to take loans. Sometimes they're unable to return the loans. And farming itself, as we discussed earlier, it's not a very profitable business if we talk of the farmers right across India. Now here we are, farmers mostly from Punjab, Haryana, Uttar Pradesh and few other areas as well who are quite concerned, and their concern is quite genuine. That it's their concern that yes, if there is no MSP, there is no guarantee of procurement, because they have made, it's almost 5 decades now, as we were discussing earlier, from 1960s to up until 2020.
Yeah, exactly.
So 5 to 6 decades, this is what they've been doing. Yes.
Right. So you made a very interesting point. It's something I didn't even know, that the government basically it stores the farmers' extra crops, and now maybe they're feeling as though they don't want to take that on. And so I find that very interesting as well. Now let's jump to the actual protests. In your opinion, would you say that this is more of a revolution or a rebellion with the amount of farmers and the people that have joined the protest now?
Yeah, just the point that we discussed earlier, and you said that yes, the government doesn't want to do that. The reason the government doesn't want to do that yes, they're saying, there's a minimum threshold level, that this is a minimum threshold level which the government wants, and the government already has double that threshold level. So it's highly surplus. So the food grains right now, which the Indian government has right now, especially paddy and wheat, it's in surplus right now. So that is the reason that the government wants to pull back. And they say that yes, even if they would want to export these wheat or paddy, there are not too many takers, because in the international market, the prices could be less, and you could, from Canada, we might be having better quality wheat here and at a much lesser price. So why would Canada import any wheat from there? Yeah, there were some disruptions in the supply chain, and those were the days in 60s when India would import rice or wheat from other countries. It has to happen with the support of the government, both at the state and at the federal level. There has to be so many things involved. The government has to offer some packages also to them. The government has to offer some incentives to them. And the farmers do realize, and now I'm coming to your second question as well, that you were just asking, that is this a rebellion or a revolution? I won't call it a rebellion. I won't even call it a revolution. I think these are just basic, genuine demands. We have to understand that these farmers, most of them, I would say, not all of them, there are some farmers with large land holdings as well. But again, approximately, I would say 86.6% of the farmers have less than, you would say, 2 acres of land. So, when you translate these into numbers, this is approximately 126 million farmers. That's the number that we're talking about. 126 million farmers is a huge number, and they feel that yes, with the privatization thing, with MSP, if at all it's taken back, if at all the guaranteed procurement is taken back, these farmers feel vulnerable. They will have nowhere to go. So this is not a rebellion, this is not a revolution. These are their genuine concerns. I'm not saying that the government is absolutely wrong or the farmers are absolutely wrong. We're not here to discuss what is wrong or right. I'm just presenting both sides of the story. So the farmers the concerns are pretty much genuine.
Let's go to MSP for a second. Could I think of MSP as almost like a minimum wage?
Minimum support price and minimum wage are two entirely different things. I'm glad that you brought up this point. Recently on my radio talk shows and on my TV talk shows as well, I've highlighted this point as well. The Agriculture Minister Tomar, he's assured that the MSP won't go away, guaranteed procurement won't go away. The mandis which are run by APMCs are there to stay. They are guaranteeing all these things. But the government also has to give an additional package while they're bringing in these private players. And you just now mentioned income support. I have coined a term which I say you have MSP, minimum support price. The term that I've coined is MSI, minimum support income. I think if a package is offered to these farmers, that you know what, the government will offer you a minimum support income. So I think quite a few of the farmers, their concerns could be addressed. I recently spoke to an Indian farmer leader who's there, one of the union leaders who was there in India. I spoke with him over the phone and I was discussing this live interview, and we had quite a few other points discussed as well. And I asked him, I said, you know what, I know the government is not offering, but this is what I was trying to read, because we have a concept of minimum income here in Canada as well, and a few other places as well. And I must, by the way, let's leave that for some other day. I'm a very strong supporter of minimum income in these countries as well. Let's leave that aside for now. So I asked this union leader that if I may suggest that if the government offers you a minimum support income to every farmer, say for instance maybe 10,000 rupees or 15,000 rupees a month, and they assure you that okay, if you have 1 hectare of land or 2 hectare or minimum this much land, the government will definitely assure you that this is your minimum support income, MSI. Obviously, if there are other farmers who are making a lot more money, they may not come under this preview, but anybody who's not even making 10,000, 15,000 a month, they will be given this minimum income support. So they said, yeah, that could be there, but the government right now is not offering, as of now, any package right now, and I think that is what needs to be discussed. And it's not that the government hasn't offered. I know in states like Telangana, the central government did offer to the state government, and the central government pitched in. Telangana has some sort of arrangement like that. Then Odisha has some sort of arrangement like that. Then I think Haryana also, they're offering that yes, we are going to offer you around $7,000 rupees monthly in case there are some strings attached, like in case you diversify to other crops. And over here as well, while there are other negotiations going on, if the government offers minimum income to the farmers, minimum support income, MSI, other than MSP, MSI. So, and they could also say that yes, we encourage, this is an incentive for those farmers who will be going towards other crops. Punjab has diversified a bit, but hasn't diversified that much. You know, we're not growing that many pulses. Yes, we have started growing a bit of more of potatoes, maybe a bit more of some other fruits like kinnu, but we haven't diversified that much. So, you know, we live in this world where today organic fruits, organic vegetables, that's highly in demand. So how can we transition the farmers of Punjab to organic farming? And I asked the farm union leader recently on my interview, I asked him, you know what, do you think this is sustainable? Because there are 3 areas in the world where the water level is depleting at a very rapid rate. One of them is California, the other area is in China, and this Punjab, Haryana belt. The water level is depleting. We are using so many fertilizers. You look at the urea that we are using. We are basically polluting the environment, we are polluting the land and depleting the water level. Is this really sustainable what we are doing in Punjab? And the farmer were still committing suicide. I mean, we have to have a comprehensive solution. It's not this, you know, we can't stop here that yes, take back the 3 laws. I'm not saying they should or they shouldn't take these 3 backlogs. That's between the farmers and the government. But you know, this is not the only issue. We have to look at long-term solutions, that how we can have a sustainable farming in India. And I think all parties would agree with me that yes, eventually it's basically the income of the farmers that has to increase. If India is growing at 2%, 4%, 8%, 10%, whatever the aim is, I think the farmers' income should be growing. A very small quick point that I want to add right now. You know, during this pandemic, we saw the GDP fell down for states, for Europe, for Canada, for India as well. But here we had the agriculture sector in India, it grew. Even during the pandemic, it grew by 4%. But did it really benefit the income of the farmers? No. So the system has to be created where farmers are benefited, their income has to grow, and the government had promised them that your incomes will be doubled. Has their income doubled? Is it practical what we're doing right now? Will their incomes be doubled? That's the question.
That is the question. And so where are talks now? Where are they at now? Because last time I heard they were at a standstill. Has there been any movement between the unions and the government?
The issue stands in front of Supreme Court right now, and Supreme Court basically cannot intervene in at least two things. The Supreme Court has clearly said that they will not intervene with the protest, and it's a democratic right of the farmers to protest. And the Supreme Court is only suggesting to the government that if they could defer these implementation of these farm laws. And they're also asking the farmers, this has been a very peaceful movement, which is great, and the Supreme Court, all it cares about, the movement remains peaceful. There is no harm to anybody. And the Supreme Court is also suggesting that if a committee could be formed, which has representative from the farm unions as well, and this committee might mediate between the government and the farmers, and then maybe things should be resolved. And the Supreme Court also expects India's central government to make this as a top priority. Why I call this protest peaceful? Because farmers, they haven't hit anybody. The farmers, they have by and large remained quite peaceful. As a matter of fact,
Yeah, no one's rioting or anything.
Sorry?
No one's rioting or anything like that.
No, you know what, there are, you see, when there are thousands and thousands of protesters, there are always anti-social elements who want to, create their own platform. They want some footage in the media, and that's what they're doing. They're creating their own separate stages, and they are, shouting anti-India slogans, or they're doing whatever. And they are free to do that as well. Maybe certain slogans were there in America, Canada, or other places, but basically I've spoken to the farmer leaders. We have broadcasted many press conferences on our channel.
Yes.
The farm leaders, they are very peaceful, and the government is also talking to them. The government is very open. I think, the way I look at things, that yes, both the sides, you could disagree with the government, you could disagree with the farmers, but one thing you would agree with both the sides, that yes, they're talking in a very nice and a democratic way. They've had 5 rounds of talks. We could argue here that yes, was the government serious? Were the farmers serious? Are the farmers serious? That you can argue, but certainly one thing you cannot argue, that this is a, anybody would want to label it as a violent protest, but no, not me. This is not at all a violent protest. It's a very, very peaceful protest that the farmers have done, and that's why the Supreme Court did intervene. Why the Supreme Court did not intervene? Because the Supreme Court clearly realized that there is no harm to any public property.
Yes, because we've seen protests in the past in India, and I guess perhaps this is what makes this protest quite different, that it is very peaceful, and the fact it's not only farmers that have joined. I've seen students, I've seen grandparents and grandchildren protesting together. That you hardly ever see that. So I think that's quite special. Who else is joining these protests? Because there's people in the millions.
Yes, you're right that yes, not only you could see a grandfather and the grandson together in this protest, because this could be affecting every aspect of life. It's not only just the farmers' protest, it's an emotional protest as well, it is a psychological protest as well. The complete society is integrated. There are many young boys, even if they're going to school or college, or even while they're working, at the end of the day, they will join their father or their parents for that matter. Obviously, the political parties could have joined the protest, but I think it's quite sensible of the farmers that they're not allowing this protest to be politicized, and they're not allowing any political leader on their stage, though I'm sure all political leaders would want to come on their stage. So which is a good thing, that though the government is claiming that yes, these protests are backed by the opposition, the Indian government is claiming that yes, the farmers are being misguided by the opposition leaders, and they're also saying that this is a very small percentage of farmers who are protesting. A vast majority of the Indian farmers, they are fine. There is I'll quote what the India's Agriculture Minister, Mr. Tomar, was saying, that yes, there is enthusiasm in the Indian farmers. And also I want to make a point here why the government is saying that, because at the end of the day, the MSP procurement, if we strictly talk in terms of MSP procurement, Basically, it's done mainly in the Punjab and Haryana belt and a few other states. So MSP procurement is done for approximately 6% of the crop. So there are quite a few other farmers, like there's not much procurement done in quite a few other states as well. So maybe they are not really being affected right now with these things, or they will be affected at a future date. And that's what the government's claim is right now. The government is claiming that yes, there are other happy farmers in Madhya Pradesh, there are other farmer unions in Karnataka, there are other farm unions in Gujarat, Odisha. They have an alliance partner in Bihar. The Chief Minister of Bihar is saying we are okay with that, we welcome this news. So Uttar Pradesh, the Chief Minister, they have a BJP government, though a vast section of the Uttar Pradesh farmers unions, they are also protesting against the government, but there are few who have already come in support of the government, and I think the government will now want more and more farmers unions coming on their side right now.
How many unions are involved in this?
Broadly speaking, there are around 35 to 40 unions which are involved as of now, but the number could grow in the coming times because you know, at one time this agitation only started in Punjab, and then it's reached a few other parts of Haryana, then Uttar Pradesh, and finally it has went up to Delhi now, and the agitations or the protests have been in quite a few other states of India as well, including Bengal, Maharashtra, even in Madhya Pradesh, where there's a BJP government. So the agitation is picking up, but broadly speaking, there are around 35 to 40 organizations right now.
Yudhvir, tell me about who are the people that are not on board with this protest?
If you talk about the farmers unions, I don't think so. Anybody from Punjab is not on board, or mostly the unions from Haryana are also on board. I would say the major union from Uttar Pradesh, they're also on board right now. And I think it doesn't really matter that you don't have to bring unions from all over India on board. I understand the government's point where they're saying that yes, it's just a small percentage, only a few farmers are protesting. But again, even if you talk about 6% are being benefited from MSP, 6% is still a huge number. We're talking millions and millions of people. And these are one of the most vulnerable part of the society. The government does have to take care of them. And I'm not denying the fact that the government, you know, initially they were quite reluctant to even start any discussion. Then the government started discussing. Initially it was the agriculture secretary, then the minister Tomar, he came, another cabinet minister, Mr. Piyush Goyal, he also joined the discussions. Eventually we had the home minister, Mr. Amit Shah, he joined the discussions. And the government started offering them the concessions that, okay, fine, we're ready to, you know, have some amendments. Though the government still believes that their initial draft was fine from their perspective. But they say, okay, if you have these concerns, the government says we are ready to give in writing MSP. They have agreed that yes, the farmers could go with their grievances to the courts. They've started agreeing on few amendments now, and I'm sure they could agree on a few more amendments. But to completely repeal all the three laws, I don't think so. The government is agreeing right now, and the farmers, they want nothing short. Other than the only route is that yes, they could have a Supreme Court monitored or Supreme Court appointed or something like a committee like that. Yes.
Nice. Okay, question. So is it accurate that the Indian government pushed all three of the bills through without any deliberation in Parliament in September? Because this is when they all went through, just recently in September, right?
There are usually, you know, in journalism, we are taught that there are two sides to the story, and sometimes there are more sides of the story. So this is one of those aspects where you have to cover at least 3 or 4 sides of the story. Story number 1, these laws were brought through ordinance, and that's one of the primary objections, that why these laws were brought through an ordinance. They should have been debated in the parliament, and after a debate in the parliament, then these laws should have been implemented. And this is not the right time. That's another question the opposition is asking. Why so much rush when the pandemic is going on? So why rush these ordinances and suddenly implement them? So these are quite a few questions being asked to the government. Now, the
Right.
government side story is this, that this is nothing new. This was discussed first time in the year 2003, and that is the time, at that time there was BJP government, at that time India's former Prime Minister, Mr. Vajpayee was there. That is the time these reforms were initiated, and they were discussed during the Congress regime as well. As a matter of fact, a few states, they already reformed a few laws, including Punjab, whether it was the Congress, the previous Congress government, Captain Amarinder Singh was the Chief Minister at that time in 2007, and then in 2013 again, when the Akalis came to power, the Akalis again they made few changes to these laws. And out of the 29 states, currently we have 29 states in India, 22 states have already reformed the laws one way or the other. And also the government is claiming that if you read the manifesto for the Congress party, the 2019 when there were elections in India, they had also mentioned these reforms. So the interesting part here is, in India's political system, there is always like this. The biggest reforms that India had in 1991, Dr. Manmohan Singh, who eventually became the Prime Minister, he was a finance minister under the PV Narasimha Rao government. When he wanted to bring in massive reforms in India and he wanted to open up the economy, when he suggested liberalization, first of all, he had opposition within his own party, the Congress party. There were few senior leaders who weren't really interested in these reforms. So Dr. Manmohan Singh had to fight that. Secondly, the left front, they were also not very happy with all these reforms, and they strongly opposed that. Good for the Congress government that yes, the Soviet Union disintegrated in 1991 towards the end, and the left front was a little bit weakened. Third, the BJP in the opposition, the BJP was sitting in the opposition, and they strongly opposed those reforms of 1991. But eventually, Dr. Manmohan Singh and Narasimha Rao, they had their way, and Dr. Manmohan Singh went ahead with his team of very strong bureaucrats. They went ahead and implemented the 1991 reforms. I still remember at that time his own secretary, Mr. S.P. Shukla, he was the secretary to the then finance minister, Dr. Manmohan Singh. He also opposed that, and eventually he resigned from his position. But it went ahead. 96, the government fell down. United Front made the government in 1996 in India. They were opposing these, but they still carried on with the reforms. 1998, the main opposition party, BJP, comes to power. BJP leads the NDA government in 1998. The reforms that they were opposing in 1991, they kept on implementing those reforms in 1998. And this happens in India. When you're in opposition, you say one thing, and when you're in the ruling, with the ruling party, or you're in the driver's seat, you do other things.
Right. Wow. Well, thank you so much for laying that all out. There's lots of information that I didn't even know, and I'm sure a lot of our viewers, this is new information for them as well. I just want to make sure I'm clear on one thing. There are states in India right now that have accepted the new reforms, farmers. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
So
Yeah. There are states who have accepted these new reforms, and that's what the government is claiming. The government says that yes, we have implemented these new reforms, and we've started implementing them, and the states have started benefiting. The government is also saying that just when you had private sector coming in, and the farmers started benefiting in Madhya Pradesh, the farmers started benefiting in Karnataka, the farmers started benefiting in other places, and while the farmers just started to take the benefits of these new laws, here we are with the protest, and the protests are once again blocking the way for the farmers. This is the government's claim, and that is a very important point that the government is making here, that in case we repeal all these laws, then the reforms that are needed not only in the farming sector. Yes, one thing I think we will all agree, that India needs a lot of reforms, not only in the farming sector. We need educational reforms, we need judicial reforms, land reforms. There are hundreds of reforms that I think every system needs reforms. Here in Canada also, or in states or anywhere else, we all need reforms. But how do we bring on the reforms? Do we have all the stakeholders on table? Do all of them agree with all these reforms? and how do we facilitate the transition of those reforms so that not many people, especially those who are vulnerable, the common man, they are not hit by these reforms, and eventually, I call this, there will always be some sort of disruption, but the disruption has to be creative. Now the government is saying this is for their benefit, and yes, the government also understands there will be some sort of disruption, but in my viewpoint, as long as the disruption is creative and eventually it benefits in the long term, it is good. But here we have the farmers, they say this is not disruption, this is not creative, this is not even creative disruption, this is destruction. Yes.
If there, okay, I just need to understand this point. The government mentioned that the other farmers from the other states are benefiting. Okay, so that's coming from the government. Have the farmers, in fact, come out and said, hey, Punjabi and Haryana farmers, like, don't worry, everything's going to be okay? Or has that not happened? Because if there are already farmers from other states that have implemented and are quote unquote benefiting from the new reforms, what is the worry then with the other farmers?
You see, after the government went through these ordinances and made it, an implemented law, we haven't even had one cycle of the crops. So it's too early to say or too early to reach any conclusion. So I think it'll be too early right now. The second, there are so many other aspects of this story. I'll tell you how. You know what? One size doesn't fit all. Not all farmers do the farming in the same way. Not all farmers across India, grow the same crops. I'll give you a quick example. Say, let's take the example of Bihar. In Bihar, when around 12 or 14 years ago, when Bihar started, bringing reforms to this APMC system and dismantling the mandi system, did it affect the farmer? Actually, the ground situation is that yes, the farmer wasn't even selling through these mandis that much. The farmer was selling in the village itself. They weren't going to the mandis. So even if the APMC system was dismantled, the farmer wasn't making any money earlier. The farmer isn't making, any profitable money out of this farming right now in Bihar. As a matter of fact, there are farmers from Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh. They're still coming to Punjab, and one of the reasons is this, that yes, they were not getting that benefit of MSP. The government says, I mean, there is no written rule that they guarantee that, but still it's an administrative policy that yes, there are MSPs for 23 crops. But does all those 23 crops sell on these MSPs? The answer is no. Maybe, paddy is one of the main crops which is being sold through MSP. Then you have wheat, which is sold through MSP, around 70%, 85% of paddy is done that way. Maize, somewhat, but other crops, they're not being sold through this MSP. So if a farmer is not even growing these crops, so they're not being guaranteed any procurement, they're not being guaranteed any MSPs through the mandis. And here we are, that the farmers have benefited or not. So that is one of the reasons it's too early right now to conclude whether these laws will be implemented or not. And this was my suggestion. Again, today I didn't want to give my opinion, I just wanted to present a fact. But you brought me to a point where this is just my suggestion or an opinion, and that's what the Supreme Court has also now asked. And this was my opinion long time back as well, that if these implementation could be deferred for 6 months, 1 year, or maybe even 2 years, and you can bring in all stakeholders, and in case all the stakeholders, all these 30, 40 farm union leaders agree, if the agreement is reached in 2 days, go ahead, implement them. If it's reached in 6 months, 1 year, or let's take a time of, say, maximum limit of 2 years. If all the farming unions, they agree on that, then these laws, go ahead and implement them. Just in case all the farm unions do not agree, even in a time span of maybe 2 years, then the central government can still go ahead and implement them. But they can also, give this to the state governments that, it's your jurisdiction. If you want to implement them, you can do that. Because one of the main claims of the government is already there are private players. It's not that private players are not buying the crop right now. The private players are already buying a crop. The government is saying we are actually formalizing everything so that You don't have flyby, somebody comes here and, buys the crop and moves out, and here you are with the farmers. They can't ask anything, and the government says we are basically formalizing everything. Okay, so if you really wanted to formalize, the private sector is already operating right now. So after 2 years, implement them, give state this much power that in case you want to implement. And now if the government is saying there are farmers benefiting in Madhya Pradesh, there are farmers benefiting in Gujarat, Odisha, Karnataka, or even Bihar, so fine, you could go ahead and implement in those states, and eventually if Punjab, Haryana or any other states, they will see that yes, this is beneficial, then these states might join and say yes, because as of now, in Punjab, the current government, that's the Congress government, it is opposing these laws. In Delhi, there is Aam Aadmi Party, they are opposing these laws. In Punjab, the previous government was Akali Dal and BJP, but now Akali Dal has separated. In case Akali Dal comes back to power, it would be up to them, or Congress can implement or not. So, and you know what, this is another point that I wanted to discuss, that farmers are also asking that is this constitutional, because they're saying that agriculture is a state subject and this is not within the jurisdiction of the central government. So the state government, they should be doing this. So now if the central government says that yes, agriculture is a state subject, agricultural marketing is also falls under the state jurisdiction. So now if the state government comes with this thing, because trade and commerce basically that comes under the preview of the central government. Period is over, they can give the states the charge.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. If you go state by state, what you presented sounds like a very just or fair way, and also gives the farmers a chance to actually see with their eyes and hear the experiences of other farmers. So it gives them some relief, because right now there's a lot of fear. Now we keep going through reform. And something that I was just, getting from listening to you right now is perhaps, is there an option where the farmers could go through an education of some sort? You had mentioned earlier that farming, in fact, isn't the most prosperous thing, I guess, or work, but that blows my mind a little bit because it's been in the culture and the family for many, many years. Now, if the government came back with something to educate the farmers in farming and something else to help supplement, that be a viable option? And is that something that you think the farmers would go for?
Yeah, I'm sure the farmers would welcome that. Yeah, that's a very nice question. While I was in India, I worked as an engineer, and I had quite a few people working on the floor with me. And over there, most of the people who were working on the floor with me, whenever I would go down from our office to these workers, I would ask them that you own land, you have your own farming practices, why would you come here and work on the floor in this auto plant? So they would say, you know what, we're always there for, if we get any fixed income, it's always good for us. Here we are getting overtime in this factory as well. It was a huge factory, it was an auto manufacturing plant. So I think it's not that the farmers are not ready to for a different profession, or they don't want to diversify the crops. They are ready to transition, but the farmers need proper support from the state government. They need proper support from the central government. Now, if I may ask you, here in Canada, or okay, let's go to states. Most of the big corporations, they are being run by the CEOs are from the Indian origin. I still remember a time in 80s, even in 90s, there was any big company in India, you would have a CEO from states or from England. It's the other way around. You go to America, any big company, whether it's Microsoft, Google, or any other major company, the CEOs are all from India. But very interesting point that I want to make here. Is there any CEO from Punjab? The question is that we haven't developed that level of institutes. The IITs, the IIMs in 70s, 80s, 90s, these all IITs and IIMs, or even AIMS for that matter, all these major institutes which churn out great professionals in management, engineering, or in the field of medicine. They were all these institutes, none of these institutes was there in 70s, 60s, 80s or 90s in Punjab. So now we have to have now we started having these institutes. So you're right that yes, the farmers, they will be ready if we have good educational institutes in Punjab. We need major reforms in Punjab, Haryana, or you're talking about the farmers. This is one area. So we have to train the farmers for diversification. We have to give them a minimum income support. Again, I repeat, a minimum income support while they transition. We have to start educating the farmers for better farmers practice. So if all these reforms are done and the government makes sure that the private sector is not exploiting these farmers, reforms are more than welcome. And the current system is not at all sustainable. We are depleting our water level, we are polluting our land. This is not a very sustainable system that we are having right now.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you sharing all of that. And you've given me and the viewers a lot to think. Now, before we wrap up, is there anything else that you would like to add?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is that in every sector, reforms are needed. We say that private sector is definitely welcome, but I think it's very important for the government to play a very important role, that the reforms are strategically designed in such a way that yes, there could be disruptions always, but it's a creative disruption. At the end of the day, it's for the betterment of a common person. The corporates or the private players will always come to make money. They are not there for charity. We all understand that. But yes, the government should watch the interest of a common person, and reforms are always welcome.
Right. I think it would also be very interesting to see how governments reform themselves around the world. As we saw, this protest has sparked many other protests around the world, and even here in Toronto, farmers are being affected in different markets as well. Food production is a huge topic. So it would be interesting to see how governments are also going to reform themselves. Yudhvir, I want to thank you so much for joining me here on Wholehearted News. This story is still unfolding, and I look forward to speaking with you again. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me. You are very welcome, and certainly we'll carry on the discussion.